Hey everybody, good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the Biotech Capital Compass video podcast. This is actually the first of a new series that I will be undertaking going forward. It's called a video companion. And really what this is it will accompany a note about a company or maybe a sector or some topic and present a simplified narrative and framework that'll be actually free to all that will really condense and maybe just act as an outline of what we were thinking when we did the original analysis in the newsletter, which, as you all know, goes to our paid subscribers, the newsletter, other than the synopsis up in front of the newsletter. So really what this is a way to help people who are new to biotech, a lot of people who don't necessarily want to be paid subscribers, to really get you kind of involved, get you start thinking about biotech, about our analysis on a stock from a very broad framework perspective, an outline perspective, and then also over time, as you become more comfortable, you should be able to sort of recapitulate, what we did yourselves, because ultimately this is what the Biotech Capital Compass is all about. It's not about my knowledge of the sector or of biotech companies or of investing. It's really at the end of the day to help our readers understand biotech far better so they can profit from it. And then also they can understand it and eventually maybe even profit from it by understanding it. So, that's really the underlying ethos of the Biotech Capital Compass. And these video companions, not with all notes, but with a lot of notes where I think it's important to explain the framework / the outline of our thinking to our readers. So let's start with Vertex. That's a note, that newsletter we wrote a couple of days ago. It was the second or about the third, I think, in a series we've been doing on Vertex, which is one of the large cap bellwethers for biotech and just a very interesting company in general. And we're not going to talk in biotech jargon, not as a stock tip, but really as a simple case study in how business execution eventually shows up in the stock price. And Vertex actually is a pretty good example of that. Vertex is one of those companies that always feels expensive and always feels high quality, and often leaves investors wondering, when does good science actually turn into better stock performance? That's the question we're going to try to simplify today. Even when I was on what's called the sell side, or when I was a hedge fund investor, often we'd look at companies that were doing really well, where, if you just looked at the share price, you would think to yourself, oh my God, I've missed it. I don't want to invest here, especially if you're more of a conservative investor. And Vertex is one of those companies where we can actually talk about why maybe, sometimes one has not missed anything. Great company, in this case, with great science and great execution, you can hop onto it, even though it at that moment looks like it's sort of, priced high or priced to perfection, which I don't think Vertex is right now. But let's get through this first. So what Vertex used to be prized for, that's our first section here. For years, Vertex was essentially a one franchise company, cystic fibrosis, or CF, and it was a great one. CF drugs generated massive, reliable cash flows with very high margins. That cash paid for research, absorbed mistakes, and protected the downside. Cystic fibrosis is a disease of the lungs. It's a disease that actually can affect the entire body. It's a genetic disease, but primarily, initially impacts the lungs. And a lot of people by their teenage years have a very, very, very reduced quality of life, can't go to high school, often can't get out of bed. And by the time, before the Vertex drugs, they would be dead in their 40s or late 30s. Now they're living to, much, much longer than that. So again, these CF drugs have generated just massive and reliable cash flows, as we said earlier. The stock price, the stock was priced for durability of these cash flows, not excitement. As long as the CF franchise and its cash flows held up, Vertex deserved a premium valuation. And that's what people were paying for, I would say, probably about 5 or 6 years ago. But markets don't stand still. Around 2023, 2024, investors stopped rewarding steady and safe and started asking a tougher question: what's next? That shift mattered a lot for the stock, for Vertex. So let's go to the second section. Now, why 2025 was a tough year for the stock? We actually wrote on that in August of last year. That's a paid newsletter. If you want to really dig into stuff and get to know the nitty-gritty of how we analyze stocks and companies, please feel free to become a paid subscriber. But in 2025, Vertex actually made progress. The stock actually didn't respond much. Why? Because the company was in what I'd call an investment phase. And in biotech, this actually happens often. Vertex launched two new products. Aside from the CF products that were already out there, there's like 4 or 5 of them that were already commercialized. There's a product called Casgevy, a one-time gene editing treatment. This was in partnership with a company called CRISPR Therapeutics. That's their partner for this, for Vertex. Another, self-originated product called Journavax, a non-opioid pain medicine. Launching drugs like this is expensive. You build teams, educate doctors, work with insurers, and scale manufacturing. All that hurts margins before it helps earnings. So again, remember, the first 1 to 3 years of these launches, even though the revenues are coming in, they're spending more money than the revenues coming in. So it's actually a product, or in this case, two products that are taking away from the profitability of the CF franchise, which is highly profitable and has been for a while. So the company's essentially using those cash flows to fund these launches, develop these products, and then fund these launches. But as these products are launching, there's still what's called cash flow negative in finance, lingo. So from the market's point of view, revenue growth slowed a bit, margins came down, and investors said, "Show me this actually scales." Investors wanted to know that the second and third launches would actually scale and then add to the profitability going forward. So the stock went sideways in 2025. Expectations came down, matters more than it sounds. And I'll explain later what it means, what I mean by expectations came down for the stock price. So in this section, part 3, let's talk about what's different heading into 2026. And here's where the story gets really interesting. By late 2025 and early 2026, Vertex stopped talking about building and started talking about throughput. That's a big shift. That's really important. Actually, at the JP Morgan conference, the CEO, who I was lucky enough to get to know when I was a sell-side analyst, and I admire tremendously that entire team over there, really her language suddenly shifted if you actually read, the transcript from that JP Morgan conference. I've been doing this for a long time, so I notice these things. Hopefully for those people who get more into biotech, you will also become pretty proficient at this sort of stuff. But really, Vertex, now is talking more about building, stopped talking about building, and now is starting talking more about throughput. So not really about building something, but more about scaling something. Like I said before, that's a big shift. So for Casgevy, it's no longer do patients want it. It's how many patients can actually move through the system, referral, cell collection, infusion, every quarter. For Journavax, it's no longer just is it approved. It's our doctors prescribing it routinely, our insurers paying. Does usage repeat? At the same time, Vertex's renal disease program, especially in what's called IgA nephropathy, moved from interesting science to real regulatory timelines. So now what we have is, beginning of 2026, the CF franchise still throwing off lots of cash, new products starting to scale, and a pipeline asset that could become a third major pillar. That's what I talked about, the renal disease program. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. That combination didn't exist before. We could kind of see it over the horizon last year, but investors, that's why the stock went sideways all of last year, because investors they were basically biding their time. Is this really going to work out the way that Vertex is telling us? And now we're starting to see that potentially could. It's not over the horizon anymore. It's right there for us, as an investor. Now, let's talk about the next section, why valuation now matters. Here's a key stock market translation. After week 2025, Vertex's valuation multiples, things like price to earnings, are now back the middle of their historical range. We showed this in a figure in our newsletter from a couple of days ago. That means that expectations have cooled. So what is price to earnings multiple? You can look up the technical definition, you can Google it, AI programs explain it really well, but let me put it very simply to you. A price to earnings multiple, all it essentially tells you is that how much are investors willing to pay for future growth of a company? And so if that price to earnings multiple is high, it means that those investors believe that future growth is going to occur, number one, and then number two, they're willing to pay a lot for it. So, a company can tell you, hey, we're going to have lots of great growth 2 or 3 years from now. But if the PE multiple is compressed, at that point, what that should tell most investors, and I'm kind of simplifying it a little bit, is that, investors aren't really believing the company, which is why the price to earnings multiple is compressed. Price to earnings multiples expand when investors believe, there is really good growth or good growth is coming, number one. And then number two, they're willing to pay for it, which is why they own the stock. So now, having said this, because of a flat share price performance last year, Vertex is like PE multiple and other multiples have come down more to the middle of their historical range, as I said earlier, and expectations have cooled. So when expectations are lower, execution matters more. If earnings grow faster than expected, the stock responds. If margins improve, the stock responds. If pipeline risk comes off the table, the stock responds. In plain English, Vertex no longer needs perfection, it needs progress. So let's talk about, this next section. I call it the simple checklist investors should watch. So if you want to follow the story without getting lost in biotech details, here's a checklist. Is the cystic fibrosis, does that franchise stay stable? Not growing fast, just reliable. It looks like consensus is going to say it's going to grow about mid-single digits. So will Vertex meet that and then ideally beat it going forward? Then number two, do Casgevy and Journavac show repeatable growth? Not hype, actual usage and revenue consistency. We want to see that in the second year of launch, right? That's scaling, so to speak. Do margins stop falling and start improving? So because the company over the last couple of years had been more in investment phase, their margins, revenues minus cost equals earnings, and that cost reduces margins, right? Those margins had been coming down. Now, do we want to see them improving as these second and third projects that have been launched now start scaling? So this is what drives earnings growth that's faster than revenue growth. Often you hear investors call it earnings leverage. Right. And then lastly, does renal get regulatory clarity in the next 12, 24 months? This is the next big pipeline sort of set of catalysts. That's a potential multiple changer. So if that's positive, they had phase 3s reading out by the end of this year, I think, or sometime next year, then they'll expand the multiple because you would expect investors expect more growth coming in the future from those renal projects, getting approved in the future if the phase 3 clinical trials are positive. So if 2 or 3 of these go right out of these 4, that the stock likely re-rates this year. If not, Vertex stays high quality, but range bound. So the takeaway is simple. Vertex isn't really a story stock right now. It's an execution stock. The science is largely known. The cash engine is proven. What changes the stock from here is whether new franchises mature fast enough to matter and whether margins recover as they do. This is exactly kind of set up where fundamentals quietly catch up with expectations, and that's often where stocks start moving again. So again, thank you so very much for watching this. I thought this was going to be about 5 to 7 minutes. It's about double that, but I do hope it's useful. Again, thank you for watching, for supporting, and be well out there. Take care.